December 11th, 1944. The Eagle's Nest. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stood against a concrete wall with his hands raised. Beside him stood Field Marshal Walter Model and General Hasso Manteuffel. The three most powerful commanders in the German West were being humiliated by the SS, forced to surrender their sidearms, patted down like common criminals, their briefcases torn open and searched. The air in the room was heavy with silent fury. These were men of the old Prussian aristocracy. They valued honor above breath itself. And here they were being pawed at by political thugs. Inside the bunker, a trembling Adolf Hitler revealed his masterstroke, Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Battle of the Bulge. 200,000 German soldiers would smash through the Ardennes and capture the port of Antwerp. Hitler assured them victory was certain. The Americans, he said, were cowboys and playboys. They would panic at the first shot. They would break and run just like they had at Kesselring Pass 2 years earlier. Von Manteuffel said nothing, but he did not share his Führer's confidence. Von Manteuffel had fought the Americans. He knew they were not cowboys who would break at the first shot. But there was something else the German High Command had gotten wrong, something that would only become clear decades later. For decades, we have been sold a specific story, a story largely written by the German generals themselves. In their post-war memoirs and interviews, they claimed they had feared George Patton from the very start. They claimed they tracked his every move from North Africa to Normandy. They claimed he was the one man who kept them awake at night. It was a compelling story. It flattered the Americans, and it saved the pride of the Germans. But when historians finally cracked open the actual daily intelligence files from 1944, the documents written when the bullets were still flying, they found something shocking. The files were empty. In February 1944, 4 months before D-Day, German intelligence prepared detailed profiles on every senior Allied commander expected to lead the invasion: Eisenhower, Montgomery, Bradley. Omar Bradley's file was thorough. Montgomery's was exhaustive. Patton's file did not exist. There was no obsession. There was no fear. Until August 1944, there was barely a mention. The German generals had not been tracking Patton. They had been ignoring him. So how did the man they ignored become the man they claimed to fear most? And if they were not watching Patton, who were they actually watching? The answers came from post-war interrogations conducted by American Army historians and British military writer B.H. Liddell Hart. For years, they interviewed captured German generals about their assessment of Allied commanders. What those generals revealed was far more complicated than the story they had been selling. Of all the Allied commanders, only one earned genuine contempt from German generals. Mark Clark commanded the Fifth Army in Italy. He was tall, photogenic, and obsessed with his own image. He kept a personal public relations staff. He positioned photographers to capture his best angles. He believed he was destined for greatness. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring commanded German forces in Italy. After the war, he offered his assessment of Clark with barely concealed disdain. Kesselring told interrogators that Clark was predictable because he was vain. Clark would always choose the option that generated the best headlines. Military logic was secondary to publicity. The proof came at Anzio in May 1944. Clark's forces had broken out of the beachhead. The German 10th Army was retreating north, exposed and vulnerable. Clark had a chance to cut them off and destroy an entire German army. Instead, Clark turned his forces toward Rome. He wanted to be the liberator of the First Axis capital. He wanted the photographs, the headlines, the glory. He let the German 10th Army escape to fight another day. There is a tragic cost to that vanity. While Clark posed for photos in the Colosseum, American infantrymen were still dying in the mud of northern Italy, fighting the very same German units Clark had failed to trap. The photos were beautiful. The price was paid in blood. General Siegfried Westphal, Kesselring's chief of staff, considered Clark one of the greatest assets German forces had in Italy, not because of his skill, but because his vanity made him predictable. When you knew Clark wanted glory more than victory, you knew exactly what he would do. If Clark was predictable because of vanity, Bernard Montgomery was predictable because of caution. Montgomery commanded the British 21st Army Group. He had defeated Rommel at El Alamein. He was Britain's greatest military hero, and German generals could set their watches by him. Rundstedt's assessment was clinical. Montgomery was very systematic, he said. He would never attack until he had assembled overwhelming force. That approach worked if you had sufficient forces and sufficient time, but it also meant the Germans always knew when the attack was coming. General Günther Blumentritt, chief of staff to Rundstedt, demonstrated Montgomery's methods during his interrogation. He stood up and walked across the room in slow, deliberate steps, one foot carefully placed before the other. No sudden movements, no risks. That, Blumentritt said, was how Montgomery moved. They knew his formula. He required at least 2-to-1 superiority in men and 4-to-1 in tanks. They knew he would bombard for days before advancing. They knew he would stop at nightfall and consolidate rather than push through. This made him beatable, not through superior force, but through superior speed. If you could redeploy faster than Montgomery could prepare, you could always stay one step ahead. Operation Market Garden was the single time Montgomery abandoned caution. He gambled on a bold airborne assault to capture bridges across the Rhine. It was audacious. It was aggressive. It was everything Montgomery usually was not. It was also a catastrophic failure. 17,000 Allied casualties, the British 1st Airborne Division destroyed for the German defenders. It was a moment of grim satisfaction for the Allied paratroopers left isolated at Arnhem. It was a nightmare. They had been dropped a bridge too far, sacrificed on the altar of a cautious general trying to prove he could be bold. German commanders noted the irony. The one time Montgomery tried to act like Patton, he proved why he should have stayed cautious. Not all British commanders earned German disdain. Harold Alexander commanded the 15th Army Group in Italy, technically Montgomery's superior in the Mediterranean. Where Montgomery was rigid, Alexander was flexible. Where Montgomery demanded control, Alexander managed. Kesselring held Alexander in genuine respect. He called him a gentleman and meant it as the highest professional compliment. Alexander commanded what Kesselring called a mongrel army. Americans, British, Canadians, Free French, Poles, Indians, Brazilians, New Zealanders, dozens of nationalities with different equipment, different doctrines, different languages. Holding them together required diplomacy that Montgomery never possessed. Kesselring observed that Alexander understood coalition warfare. He did not demand that everyone fight his way. He found ways to use each force's strengths while minimizing friction between allies. This made Alexander harder to predict than Montgomery. He was not wedded to a single doctrine. He adapted to circumstances. He let his subordinate commanders exercise initiative. German generals saw Alexander as what Montgomery could have been if Montgomery had possessed any humility. A British commander who earned respect through flexibility rather than demanding it through arrogance. The contrast was deliberate in German assessments. When interrogators asked about British leadership, German generals consistently praised Alexander while criticizing Montgomery. It was a rare thing in the brutality of the Second World War, a moment where enemy commanders looked across the battle lines and saw a reflection of their own professional code. They wanted to kill Alexander's army, but they would salute the man leading it. The message was clear. Germany's enemies were not uniformly good or bad. Some Allied commanders earned genuine professional respect, others did not. Dwight Eisenhower was supreme Allied commander. He controlled more military power than any general in history. German generals did not consider him a general at all. Rundstedt's assessment was blunt. Eisenhower was a coordinator, not a commander. He was a political figure who managed the alliance. He was not a soldier who understood battle. German generals recognized that holding the Allied